the Zen secret to letting go of regret and finding deep sleep. Right now, a localized dry constriction or binding sensation is radiating entirely across the back of your knees and pulling upward into your lower hamstrings. A physical state of emotional freeze that settles into the body when you carry the silent weight of a drifted relationship. It is the heavy, aching stiffness born from months of avoidance, from allowing a close friendship or a vital family bond to slowly wither while you were consumed by your own professional busyness, chronic exhaustion, or a quiet fear of reaching out after too much time has passed. Perhaps you are staring into the dark tonight because your mind is trapped in a loop of silent regret, looking at a name on a screen that you haven't called, feeling a profound guilt for your absence, and believing that the distance has grown too wide to ever close without an awkward, painful struggle. In this quiet space, the immediate room around you is building a sanctuary of total, unmonitored privacy. The air has taken on a cool, slate-like weight, dropping toward the floorboards while the distant hum of the world completely dissolves into the dark corners of the ceiling, far away from the exhausting pace of your daily obligations. Outside your window, a quiet dew is collecting on the dry summer grass, cooling the earth and creating a profound, undisturbed perimeter around your bed. The smooth weave of the lower sheet supporting your calves requires no explanations from you tonight, and it does not keep a tally of how many messages you left unanswered, or how many months have slipped by since you last showed up for someone you love. There is no social performance to maintain in this shadow, no old conversations to rewrite, and no guilt to unpack before the dawn. You are not broken, dear friend. What you are feeling right now is not a sign of personal failure, nor is it proof that you are uniquely cold, negligent, or incapable of deep, sustained devotion. The heavy drift you are mourning is simply the natural consequence of a human life that ran out of emotional fuel during a long, demanding season. Tonight, we will not force your mind to be silent, nor will we demand that you banish these heavy regrets from your thoughts. We will not treat your avoidance as a moral flaw that must be violently corrected, or your guilt as an enemy that must be punished in the dark. Instead, we are going to change the way your awareness holds this unresolved distance, learning how to lower your heart into a deeper pool of presence where old fractures can naturally swell shut on their own. There is an ancient, surprising insight within the Zen lineage that addresses this exact ache. The bonds we have allowed to dry out do not require aggressive repair, frantic apologies, or strategic engineering to find their integrity again. We overthink our distance because fear convinces us that if we do not manually force an immediate solution from above, the connection will be permanently lost to the dust. But this desperate mental hammering is not a bridge, it is the very thing that splits the wood, exposing our deepest guilt to the harsh glare of self-judgment. Peace is found not by solving the problem of your past negligence tonight, but by letting your awareness drop below the level of your strategies, allowing your presence to settle like cool water into its own subterranean depth. Maybe you have felt this too. During those heavy hours when the silence of an uncalled loved one feels like a physical barrier, an invisible wall of time that grows thicker with every week you remain paralyzed by your own busyness. If it feels right, take a slow breath into the absolute bottom of your lungs, noticing the simple, unhurried expansion of your lower back and the way the air naturally recedes from your body without any intervention from your thoughts. You do not need to force anything into a state of perfection right now, and absolutely nothing is required of you before the sun rises. The relationships you are worrying about, the drifted connections, the unsaid words, the people who are carrying their own unmonitored storms, all of these things can exist exactly as they are, without your active management tonight. You are safe enough to soften the dry constriction behind your knees. When we constantly stress over the time we have lost, our relationships begin to resemble a hand-carved cedar bucket left hanging for months above the waterline in a dark stone well. Deprived of the natural moisture of the deep, the wooden staves slowly begin to shrink, their fibers contracting in the dry air until small, hollow gaps open between the seams. If a person stands at the top of the well and frantically pours buckets of water into that dried-out vessel from above, trying to force it to hold its capacity through sheer effort, The water leaks out instantly through the splits. The bucket cannot be fixed by a sudden rush of pressure. The force only strains the dry grain. But when that bucket is unhooked from its dry chain, lowered completely into the deep, cool water at the bottom of the well, and left to submerge in silence, a different transformation begins. The wood fibers, resting in their native element without any pressure to perform, naturally absorb the subterranean moisture. Cell by cell, the cedar expands. The grain grows heavy and full, and the dry gaps between the staves slowly, beautifully swell shut on their own unhurried timeline. The vessel becomes whole again, not because it was violently hammered or forced into shape, but because it was given a place where it was safe to be fully immersed in the deep. Your mind, in its habit of constant overthinking and guilt, has been trying to force water into a dry bucket from above, attempting to solve your relationships through the narrow, straining efforts of your intellect. You look for resolution, yet the internal gaps remain open, not because you lack love, but because you are refusing to let your heart submerge in the quiet, non-striving depth of the present moment long enough to expand. The suffering you feel tonight is the friction of that dryness, the internal tension of trying to think your way back into a connection that simply needs to be felt in the stillness. Let yourself notice that old habit of avoidance without judging it as a weakness. The instinct to pull away when we feel overwhelmed is merely a misplaced form of self-protection, a way the tired spirit tries to preserve its remaining energy when the daylight demands too much. But tonight, that protection can take a cooler, deeper form. In a moment, our journey will take us down to the stone-paved courtyard of an old, abandoned village temple, where a wise well-digger and a simple iron tool will show us how to let the dry wood find its native element without any struggle at all. For now, let your awareness rest within the simple, unrefined reality of your physical body, allowing the heavy constriction behind your hamstrings to be exactly as it is, fully protected by the absolute privacy of the night. Across the wide, desolate, stone-paved inner courtyard of an abandoned village temple, during a dry summer evening, the air remained completely still, thick, with the smell of parched earth and heat-baked granite. It was an isolated sanctuary where the village noises faded into the background, leaving only the dry rustle of cicadas in the overgrown grasses along the walls. In this quiet, dusty clearing stood a young monk named Kazan, who carried an internal ache that made his movements tentative, and his lower legs feel permanently stiff and bound. For 3 seasons, his mind had been trapped in a painful loop of quiet remorse, continuously thinking about an old childhood companion whom he had abruptly left behind when he entered the monastery. He had promised to send letters, to visit when the harvest ended, but the unrelenting demands of his daily temple training had left him too exhausted, too distracted, and too paralyzed by a subtle, growing guilt to ever make contact. Kazan carried a heavy, internal weight that made his breathing shallow, an emotional freeze that deepened whenever he saw the dust gathering on the temple road. He lived with a quiet, persistent shame that he had allowed the bond to drift. And because of this guilt, he was terrified of how his old friend would receive him if he ever gathered the courage to walk back down the mountain. To him, the increasing duration of their silence felt like an unyielding barrier, a thick wall of time that grew taller with every week he remained stuck in his avoidance. Whenever another monk spoke of their family connections, Kazan's thoughts would instantly turn into a harsh internal court case, declaring that he was a negligent, uncaring companion who had chosen his own spiritual insulation over an ancient, loyal devotion. At the center of this dry courtyard was an old stone well, its deep shaft plunging straight down into the cold, subterranean water veins of the mountain. Working at the absolute bottom of this dark shaft was Master Tesai. Tesai was an old, quiet well-digger whose voice was rough like gravel, his shoulders permanently broadened from a lifetime of moving heavy stone blocks in the damp dark. He spent his days hidden away from the sunny temple terraces, completely unbothered by the administrative hierarchies or the public ceremonies of the upper rooms. He moved with a slow, deliberate weight, his calloused hands bearing the permanent gray stains of wet limestone paste. Kazan often stood at the rim of the well, looking down into the darkness with a sense of quiet envy. unable to understand how someone could find complete serenity while working in total obscurity at the bottom of a cold hole. One evening, after an exceptionally long drought, the primary cedar bucket used to haul water for the temple kitchen began to show signs of critical failure. Left hanging for months above the waterline in the dry air of the upper shaft, its wooden staves had shrunk, contracting away from one another until small, visible gaps opened along every single seam. Kaizen had been tasked with filling the kitchen jars, and the sudden deterioration of the vessel filled his chest with a sharp, visceral anxiety. Desperate to fix the issue before the head cook discovered the leak, he laid the dry bucket across a stone slab and began using a rusted iron hoop driver, aggressively hammering the flat copper bands down toward the wider base of the wood to force the shrinking staves closer together. The harder he struck the iron, the louder the sharp metallic echoes rang across the silent courtyard. As the dusk turned the stone pavers into a dull charcoal gray, Master Tessai emerged from the well shaft, his boots dripping with cold underground moisture. The old well digger did not scold the novice for the noise or offer a lecture on the properties of timber. Instead, he walked slowly across the parched grass, laid his heavy leather tool bag on the stone wall, and stood directly beside Kaizen's trembling hands. The only sound in the vast courtyard was the rhythmic clinking of the iron driver and the dry, shallow breathing of the young monk. Tessai reached out a rough, wet hand and gently took the iron hoop driver from Kaizen's fingers, stopping the frantic hammering in midair. The old man did not look into Kaizen's face. He kept his gaze fixed on the fractured wood of the dry bucket. With a slow, unhurried motion, Tessai held the bucket up to the dim sky, showing how the forceful hammering had only managed to split the dry cedar grain, causing the gaps to widen even further under the strain. He let the rusted iron driver slide onto the stone bench, where it hit the granite with a dull, hollow thud. Then, without a word of explanation, Tessai unhooked the bucket from its heavy iron chain, walked to the lip of the well, and dropped the dried-out vessel directly into the deep, dark water at the absolute bottom of the shaft. The distant, heavy splash echoed up through the cold stone walls like a low note on a bronze bell. Tessai leaned his heavy arms against the stone rim, looking down into the absolute darkness where the bucket was now completely submerged, invisible to any eyes from above. He told the young novice that when a timber dries out from being kept too long in the sun, a man cannot cure the splits by hitting the iron hoops with a heavy tool. The force only breaks what is already brittle from neglect. He explained that the bucket does not need to be repaired from the outside. It simply needs to be returned to its element, left to rest in the cool deep until its own nature closes the cracks. He asked Kaizen if he truly believed he could heal an old, drifted connection by standing at the top of the mountain, hammering his own mind with guilt and trying to force a solution through his analytical thoughts. In that quiet moment, with the smell of the damp limestone rising from the shaft and the cold shadow of the evening settling over his arms, a profound wave of emotional recognition washed through Kaizen's chest. The metallic ringing of the hammer vanished from his ears, replaced by the deep, cavernous silence of the well. He looked down into the dark water, where the dry cedar was currently resting without any pressure to hold its capacity, and he recognized the precise nature of his own exhaustion. The vulnerability he carried did not come from his old companion's anger, nor did it come from the miles that lay between them. The suffering came from his own habit of standing at the top of his life, violently hammering his memory with shame because he was too afraid to let the relationship submerge in the quiet depth of simple presence. The old well digger picked up his leather bag and turned toward the dark quarters, leaving Kaizen alone by the stone rim in the cool, silent twilight. In a moment, this story will bring the stillness of the courtyard closer to the specific regrets of your own evening. But for now, let that image of the submerged cedar bucket rest within your thoughts, noticing how the deepest expansion always happens in the places where we stop trying to force the shape. This ancient glimpse down into the silent, stone-lined well shaft is not telling us to stop caring about the people we have left behind, nor is it asking us to become cold, detached, or numb to the natural sadness of an unkept promise. It is not an invitation to build a cynical, unyielding wall around your memories, or pretend that the quiet space between you and a loved one doesn't cause a real stinging ache in your chest. Buddhist wisdom does not expect you to look at a drifted friendship and feel nothing but a blank, empty vacuum. Instead, it is showing us something much quieter and far more protective. It is revealing that the primary source of our exhaustion is rarely the simple existence of the distance itself, but the desperate, frantic way the mind holds that distance, turning a quiet, dry season into a permanent internal executioner. When we look directly into this pattern, we can see how we continuously add a second wound to the first. The first wound is simply what life brings, a period of intense professional demands, a season where our mental energy was entirely consumed by survival, the natural human limitation that prevents us from being everywhere at once, or the simple, unpreventable reality that time moves forward and people change their addresses. This first pain is clean, an unavoidable part of living a limited human life within a fluid, unpredictable world. It is the natural drying out of the cedar staves when the summer sun beats down on the courtyard. But the second wound is the one we construct ourselves in the dark hours of the evening. It is the heavy, suffocating internal narrative that insists our temporary absence is an unforgivable moral failure, that we are fundamentally broken or ungrateful, and that we must violently punish ourselves with shame until we can engineer a perfect, flawless apology to fix the past. This second wound is the heavy iron hammer we swing against our own brittle grain, splitting our peace of mind into smaller pieces because we are terrified of the emptiness of the gap. What we often describe as a craving for resolution in our modern lives is not a deep expression of love, but the tight, suffocating grip of an anxious ego that says, "I cannot allow my nervous system to drop its guard until I can manually force this connection to look exactly the way it did before." We treat our current state of distance as an emergency that must be aggressively managed, a broken tool that must be hammered back into alignment before we are permitted to sleep. We become addicted to replaying our past negligence, checking the timeline of our drifts as if the constant mental friction could somehow rub away the years we have lost. But the great, steadying insight of this tradition reminds us that no relationship stays fixed in a single, unyielding form, and that our desperate attempt to anchor our security to a permanent, unmoving ideal is what exhausts the heart. Human connections are like natural fibers. They contract in the dry seasons of busyness and expand when they are returned to the water, changing their shape according to the climate of our lives. When we bring a soft, non-judgmental awareness to our guilt, we are not trying to erase our deep longing for reconciliation. We are simply learning how to observe the tight, binding constriction behind our knees without immediately picking up the hammer of self-reproach. We learn to notice the impulse to fix, to explain, to apologize out of panic, and we let that impulse exist as a passing echo that doesn't have the power to split our remaining strength. Letting go, when understood through this subterranean perspective, is never an act of lonely abandonment or cold indifference. It is simply the profound choice to unhook your heart from the dry chain of your complex strategies and allow it to sit completely submerged in the quiet, non-striving reality of the present moment. It is the realization that you do not need to solve the whole history of your drift tonight to be worthy of a deep, restoring rest right now. Your spirit does not require an immaculate record of constant, uninterrupted communication to possess its own native integrity. It merely needs to stop hitting its own dry wood with the weight of self-judgment. This unmoving column of water at the bottom of your awareness is like the deep mountain vein that feeds the stone well, providing a constant cool moisture that naturally restores whatever has grown brittle in the sun. The deep water does not demand an itemized apology from the dry cedar before it offers its soaking, heavy embrace. It does not require the bucket to prove its previous usefulness before it begins to fill the cracks. It simply surrounds the vessel with an immense silent patience, allowing the fibers to expand on their own unhurried organic timeline. When you allow your mind to drop into this protective immersion, you begin to experience a genuine, self-contained compassion. This compassion is the quiet capacity to hold your own regrets without turning them into a reason for self-loathing. It is the internal safety that allows you to look at your tired, defensive posture and recognize that you are allowed to stop hammering the hoops tonight. Slowly, this ancient medicine becomes remarkably intimate as you lie here in the complete privacy of the dark. You begin to see that the silence of the night is not an accusation of your negligence, but a sacred, unmonitored baseline that has been drawn around your life to let your fibers expand in peace. The world outside is still holding its own balance, entirely unbothered by the fact that you have chosen to step off the wheel of active repair for a few hours. Your true nature is already whole, already deep, and already resting in its own native element, completely independent of whether you manage to cross the mountain or write the perfect letter before the sun rises. In a moment, we will explore how to bring this soaking protection directly into your physical body, letting the natural weight of your breath lock out the dry noise of the courtyard. But for now, let the exhausting need for immediate answers dissolve into the cold, dark limestone of the shaft, knowing that your presence is enough to hold the quiet. If it feels right, allow your awareness to gather around the immediate, physical presence of your lower body, mapping out the silent space where your legs rest against the supportive texture of the bed. There is no need to regulate your breath with an artificial or aggressive cadence. Perhaps you might simply observe the natural, cool expansion of your low back as the air fills your frame, and the unprompted, heavy release that occurs as the breath glides away into the dark. With each slow, quiet exhalation, you might invite the localized dry constriction across the back of your knees and through your lower hamstrings to lose its tight, defensive grip. You are not trying to attain a state of perfect meditative stillness, nor are you required to demonstrate in flawless composure before the night ends. Even noticing the subtle warmth of your calves as they settle into the horizontal line of the room is entirely enough to begin unhooking your spirit from the day's fatigue. Right now, you might choose to bring a soft, non-judgmental attention to that specific, tight knot of regret that has been pulling at your thoughts throughout the waking hours. Do not try to push it away with sheer willpower, and do not treat it as an internal flaw that must be violently corrected before you are permitted to rest. Instead, look at it with a gentle, spacious curiosity, the way an old artisan might inspect a piece of weathered timber retrieved from a silent courtyard. Notice if there is a particular mental image anchored to this physical frieze, perhaps the shape of a name you haven't called in months, a memory of a time when you chose your own busyness over an ancient loyalty, or a persistent anxiety that the distance between you and someone you love has grown too wide to ever cross again. As you observe this thought drifting through the quiet sky of your mind, you can gently name the emotional pattern without adding any layer of critical commentary to its shape. You might silently recognize that this is simply the mind's habit of hammering the iron hoops, the old, terrified conditioning that believes if it doesn't violently attack its own past negligence with shame, the connection will be permanently lost to the dust. There is a deep, unhurried liberation in simply witnessing this pattern for what it is, rather than letting it dictate the tension of your skin. You are merely observing a deeply ingrained protective reflex, an internal guard that has simply run out of fuel and is now ready to lay down its rusted tools for the night. If it feels right, imagine yourself standing by that quiet, stone-paved temple courtyard we visited earlier, where the thick granite walls keep out the frantic clutter of the village, and the air carries the cool, deep scent of subterranean moisture. Picture your own internal landscape as that hand-carved cedar bucket resting at the edge of the well shaft. See the dry, shrunken staves, and notice how your analytical thoughts have spent the entire day frantically swinging a heavy iron hammer against the copper bands, trying to force the cracks to close through sheer psychological friction. Now, instead of using your remaining mental energy to hit the wood or plan a complex strategy of repair, you might choose to let the bucket drop from your hands completely. Imagine unhooking the vessel from its dry chain and letting it plunge straight down into the absolute darkness of the stone shaft, falling away from the glaring heat of your self-judgment. See it hit the dark, cool column of water at the absolute bottom with a low, resonant splash, letting the subterranean current rise up to submerge the dry cedar entirely. There is no need to force this imagery, and there is no pressure to witness an immediate, magical sealing of all your fractured memories. You can simply allow the vessel to rest under the surface, completely surrounded by a vast underground patience that requires no explanations or performances to offer its soaking embrace. With every slow, unhurried breath that leaves your frame, perhaps you can let the image change as the cedar fibers naturally respond to the deep moisture. Cell by cell, the wood absorbs the cool column of water. The grain grows heavy and full, and the dry gaps between the staves slowly, beautifully begin to swell shut on their own organic timeline. The bucket is becoming whole again, not because it is being aggressively repaired from above, but because it has been returned to its native element, left to rest in an unmonitored depth where time and force have no meaning. You can return to this soft, submerged baseline whenever you are ready, knowing that your heart is fully permitted to expand its fibers in the dark, far away from the exhausting necessity of active management. The skin across your lower back and the large muscles of your legs are no longer holding the weight of an unkept promise. They are letting go of the defensive armor, going entirely slack, soft and heavy in the total privacy of your room. You do not have to cross the mountain or write the perfect letter before the sun rises. What happens within your nervous system when you stop treating the distance as an emergency that needs to be fixed by your overthinking? Let your awareness drop into the cool, dark limestone of this internal well, allowing any remaining thoughts of regret to float harmlessly across your mind like loose dust settling on the water's surface, fully sustained by the absolute protection of the night. Deep inside a sunken bamboo grove situated behind a mountain monastery, where a natural cold spring continuously fed an old stone cistern, the damp air remained heavy with the smell of wet earth, crushed green stalks, and clean subterranean water. It was an isolated nook where the wind was muffled by the thick green canopy above, creating a sensory world dominated by the soft, rhythmic drop of water spilling over moss-grown limestone blocks. In this hidden hollow worked an old temple gardener named Otagaki, who had lost the use of his left arm many winters ago during a heavy mountain slide, but who moved through the dense vegetation with a fluid, unhurried grace that made his single-handed labor look completely effortless. He spoke very little, his attention usually anchored to the slow physical realities of root depth, damp soil, and the seasonal clearing of the stone water channels. Working beside him for several months was a traveling scholar monk named Rusan, who carried an internal wound that made his chest feel like an unyielding leaden block, and his hamstrings constantly tight. Ryusen had been fleeing an intense internal crisis of guilt 2 winters prior. He had been so focused on completing his academic commentaries in the eastern capital that he had utterly ignored the repeated, urgent requests from his aging elder brother to return to their ancestral village to assist with a failing farm. By the time Ryusen finally put down his inkstone and walked down the valley, his brother had sold the land in despair and disappeared into the northern provinces, leaving no trace behind. For 2 years, Ryusen's mind had been a frantic, turning wheel of overthinking, constantly replaying the letters he had left unread, agonizing over his intellectual selfishness, and living in terror that he would never receive the forgiveness he needed to feel whole again. This persistent shame had turned Ryusen's spiritual practice into a desperate, forcing struggle. He would sit in the meditation hall for hours until his knees were raw, yet the moment the bells rang, his thoughts would instantly return to the memory of that abandoned village farm. He treated his guilt as a dirty stain that had to be aggressively scrubbed away through exhaustive labor, throwing himself into the hardest physical tasks in the monastery to prove to the community and to himself that he was not fundamentally heartless. He was obsessed with finding a sudden, dramatic moment of catharsis, a profound spiritual breakthrough that would instantly erase the years of his neglect and guarantee his internal safety. One damp morning, the main water line feeding the monastery kitchen from the sunken cistern became completely blocked by deep layers of autumn debris and thick clay sediment. The entire community was left without fresh water, and the head monk assigned Ryusen the urgent task of clearing the line before the evening meal. This was exactly the kind of high-pressure crisis that triggered Ryusen's deepest anxieties. He felt an immediate, overwhelming panic that if he failed to resolve the blockage quickly, his incompetence would be exposed to everyone, confirming his underlying fear that he was a useless, negligent presence who always let people down. He ran to the bamboo grove, dropped to his knees by the stone cistern, and began frantically hauling on the ancient well rope that raised the main clearing bucket from the subterranean intake valve. The braided hemp well rope was stiffened by decades of exposure and heavily coated with slippery dark green moss. In his frantic haste, Ryusen pulled on the rough cords with an aggressive jerking motion, trying to force the heavy wooden valve open through sheer physical velocity. The rope slipped repeatedly through his bleeding palms, the knots jamming violently against the iron pulley frame with a sharp, cracking sound that shattered the quiet of the bamboo. Grove, the harder he yanked, the more the wet fibers bound against themselves, until the ancient line was snarled into a massive, unyielding tangle that threatened to snap under the erratic tension. As the morning mist began to turn into a cold, steady drizzle, Master Otagaki stepped out from the shadow of the tall bamboo stalks, carrying nothing but a simple wooden peg he used for planting seeds. The old gardener did not join Ryusen in his frantic pulling, nor did he offer a sharp word of correction for the snarled line. Instead, he walked slowly to the edge of the stone cistern, laid his planting peg on a dry ledge, and stood perfectly still, his single useful hand resting quietly against his side. The only sound in the hidden hollow was the rhythmic drip of the overflow water and the rapid, gasping breath of the exhausted scholar monk. Otagaki did not look into Ryusen's eyes. He kept his gaze fixed on the stiff, moss-coated hemp rope that was stretched taut against the iron pulley, with a slow, deliberate motion that the urgency of the kitchen's deadline. The old gardener reached out his right hand, took hold of the snarled line, and did not pull. Instead, he simply held the tension exactly where it was, taking one slow, deep breath, letting his shoulders sink down completely toward the earth before he took any action. He did not fight the knot. He sat down directly on the wet limestone rim, holding the tangled rope with an immense, unmoving patience that seemed to match the ancient weight of the stone blocks beneath him. In his low, rough voice, Otagaki told the young man that when a braided line has been left in the dry air for too long, a man cannot force it to glide smoothly through the tracks by yanking the cords with bleeding hands. The force only locks the inner fibers into an unbreakable knot, splitting the weave until the rope breaks completely. He explained that the rope does not need to be conquered. It needs to be allowed to sit in its own moisture, resting in the deep water until the stiffness naturally softens. He pointed down into the stone cistern and asked Ryusen if he truly believed he could heal the long, dry distance between himself and his brother by standing in this grove, violently yanking his own mind with shame and demanding that reality change its shape in a single morning. Standing in the cold drizzle with the smell of the wet bamboo rising around his face, a sudden, quiet realization washed through Ryusen's chest. The frantic internal court case that had been running for 2 years suddenly ran out of momentum, blunted by the immovable stillness of the old gardener's posture. He looked at his bleeding palms, then down at the moss-coated rope resting quietly in Otagaki's steady hand, and he stopped resisting the reality of his situation. He took a slow, deep breath, matching the unhurried rhythm of the cistern's drip, and as the air left his body, he let go of his grip on the line completely, allowing it to rest loosely in the old man's custody. He did not magically receive a letter from his brother, nor did his past negligence disappear from his memory. The farm was still lost, and the hurt was still real. But in that single moment, he stopped treating his anxious, self-critical thoughts as an absolute truth that he had to obey. He chose a small, quiet act of discipline. He sat down on the wet stone pavers right beside the old gardener, willing to sit with the uncertainty of the kitchen's deadline and the painful emptiness of his regret without attempting to fix it with an explanation or a frantic apology. He reached down with his own wet hand, picked up a handful of fallen bamboo leaves that were cluttering the intake screen, and gently cleared them away. One small, compassionate action that did nothing to rewrite his history, but everything to honor the moment he was actually touching. The transformation was subtle, a quiet shift in how he related to his own suffering. He stopped treating his guilt as a monster to be destroyed through spiritual violence, and began to hold it as a dry fiber that simply needed to be returned to the deep, cool water of simple presence to find its softness again. As they sat together in the damp silence of the grove, the stiff rope began to lose its rigid tension, its fibers soaking up the mist until the snarls naturally began to loosen on their own unhurried timeline. In a moment, this quiet shift will help us understand how to carry the patience of the cistern into the specific overthinking of your own evening hours. But for now, let yourself rest within that sunken bamboo hollow, knowing that you do not need to force a perfect solution to be allowed to sit down and rest on the stone bench tonight. When we look directly into the hidden architecture of our evening restlessness, we can see that our deepest torment does not emerge from the simple passage of time or the miles that separate us from those we love, but from the invisible ways we try to manipulate reality from our beds. We operate under the continuous, exhausting illusion that if we just analyze our past choices with enough vigilance, we can somehow force our history into a shape that feels permanently safe. We live in a state of quiet, chronic resistance to whatever is unfinished, unpredictable, or unresolved within our lives. We replay old conversations to see where we lost ground. We rehearse future apologies to ensure we will not be rejected. And we demand that our memories provide an endless supply of explanations to prove that we are still worthy of love. This constant need for certainty turns our inner world into a busy workshop where we are always violently hammering at our own vulnerabilities. We begin to use self-judgment as a severe, misguided tool for self-preservation, believing that if we punish ourselves with enough internal criticism for our past negligence, we can somehow prevent the pain of future isolation. Over time, this nervous alertness becomes so deeply ingrained that we begin to mistake the friction for our actual identity. We weave our old drifts, our missed turning points, and our unread letters into a heavy cloak of personal shame. And then we wonder why our lower spine and hamstrings feel like cold iron when the daylight fades. We become terrified of letting the rope go slack, because we are afraid that if we stop pulling against the knot, the connection will be permanently lost to the dust. But the timeless inheritance of Buddhist wisdom points toward a profoundly different way of relating to this internal tension. The core of this understanding rests upon a simple, vital distinction between what is called the first pain and the second pain. The first pain is merely the unpreventable weather of being a limited human being alive in an unmapped world. It is the natural drying out of a cedar bucket when the summer sun beats down on the courtyard. It is the silent drift that occurs when our emotional energy is entirely consumed by survival. It is the blunt reality that we cannot be everywhere at once or force our past choices to rewrite themselves. This first pain is entirely neutral, an unavoidable crossroad that carries no personal malice toward your name. It is simply the cold drizzle passing through the bamboo grove without checking if your palms are bleeding. The second pain, however, is the heavy, suffocating layer of suffering that the mind manually adds to that initial wound. The second pain is the long internal court case that insists a drifted friendship is proof of your permanent failure, or that a loved one's silence means you are entirely invisible to the world. It is the frantic habit of standing at the top of the well, violently swinging the iron hammer of self-reproach against your own brittle grain, and demanding that the cracks close through sheer psychological force. This second pain is the tangled, snarled well rope that you voluntarily pull tighter with your thoughts, locking your inner fibers into an unbreakable knot because you are too afraid to let the line rest loosely in the deep. We cannot always control the first pain, because we cannot command time to stand still or force an estranged companion to cross the mountain, but we can absolutely learn to stop feeding the second pain. Peace, when understood through this subterranean wisdom, is never the magical elimination of all your regrets, nor is it a state of frozen perfection where no relationship ever drifts again. True peace is simply a completely transformed relationship with those difficulties. It is the capacity to let an uncalled contact name rest on the screen without using your thoughts to slice your sense of worth into smaller pieces. It is the quiet willingness to sit on the stone bench of the present moment, right in the middle of an ambiguous silence, without allowing your mind to spin an elaborate narrative of ruin. It is the realization that your true nature does not require an immediate, frantic apology to find its structural integrity, because it is already securely anchored by its own heavy volume deep within the cool column of water. When you stop treating every anxious thought as an absolute truth, you begin to see that your actual, unmonitored existence is already fully sustained by the silence that surrounds your bed tonight. You do not need to win the argument of your past choices before the sun rises, nor do you need to correct the distance that has grown between you and the ancestral village. You can let the well bucket drop from your hands, allowing it to plunge straight down into the absolute darkness of the shaft, far below the level where names, reputations, and metrics have any power to hurt you. Your worth has never been a currency to be bartered through constant availability. It is an innate, uncarved presence that remains completely untouched by whether anyone else reaches down into the deep tonight. Slowly, the localized dry constriction behind your knees begins to lose its tight, defensive edge as this understanding sinks into your body. You see that you have merely been running an exhausted mechanism, trying to hammer a vessel that simply needed to be returned to its native element. Tonight, you can leave that iron hoop driver outside the heavy door of your room, allowing your awareness to expand until it matches the cavernous, deep-water patience of the ancient well. In a moment, we will explore how to carry this soaking protection into the specific modern interactions of your waking hours, showing you how to live in a loud world without leaving your heart exposed to its dry friction. But for now, let yourself rest securely within the single inch of time you are currently touching, fully embraced by the dense, non-judgmental obscurity of the night. Now, let this soaking protection step directly into the small, fragmented settings of your modern daily life. The wisdom of the untended well bucket and the moss-coated rope is not an abstract philosophy meant to remain locked in a hidden bamboo grove. It is a practical shield that you carry into the exact moments when your day feels most disconnected and parched. It is practiced when you find yourself staring at an unmoving screen, waiting for a text response that does not arrive, and letting that silent glass interface determine whether your lower body is permitted to unlock its tension. It is practiced when you are lying awake at night, replaying a minor conversational misstep from 3 months ago, or attempting to control the fluid, changing dynamics of a relationship that has drifted despite your best intentions to keep it anchored. We live in an era that mimics a dry, uninsulated courtyard, a fast-moving space where we are constantly encouraged to display our personal progress, our social commitments, and our continuous availability for evaluation. You look at the visible, highly curated paths of those around you, and a sudden, cold knot whispers that you are lagging far behind, that you have mismanaged your time, and that your ordinary presence is somehow not enough to guarantee your safety. Out of a habit of survival, you might find yourself smiling broadly while carrying an immense, heavy sorrow behind your eyes, pretending to be perfectly okay for the benefit of friends or family, and then bringing that exhausting, rigid mask into your bed. You want nothing more than to drop the burden and rest. Yet the moment you try to settle, a persistent layer of guilt tells you that your quiet stillness is an unearned luxury, a lazy abandonment of your duties that will only cause the distance to grow wider. But the great, steadying relief of this ancient lineage is the realization that peace is never a public trophy you achieve by forcing every connection to look perfect. It is a quality of unmonitored depth you bring to these exact, ordinary seconds. It is the simple understanding that peace is practiced in small moments when no one is watching the state of your chords. It is the brave choice to take a single, slow breath before answering an aggressive notification, or reacting to a cold silence, allowing your hamstrings to soften before you pick up the iron hammer of self-reproach. This deliberate pause is a profound form of wisdom, an intentional act of unhooking the bucket from the dry chain of your anxieties and letting it drop cleanly into the dark underground reservoir. Within this quiet sanctuary, you can begin to recognize that not every self-critical thought that crosses your mind deserves your absolute obedience, and not every fluttering feeling of guilt is a command that requires your immediate action. When your thoughts begin to spin an elaborate narrative about permanent exile or broken bonds, You can simply observe that movement as a drift of loose dust passing over a cold stone cistern. You do not have to yank the rope with bleeding palms. To fix the blockage, you can care deeply about the people you love without gripping the line so tightly that it splits your remaining strength. By refusing to treat your regrets as an active emergency, the frantic internal court case naturally runs out of fuel, allowing the fibers of your heart to expand naturally in the damp silence. You are fully permitted to rest tonight without earning it through a perfect performance or a guaranteed solution to your distance. Your value as a living form is already completely established by the simple, quiet fact that you are breathing here in the dark, an uncarved presence that requires no external nod of approval to hold its place in the world. You do not need to possess an immaculate record of constant communication, a flawless history of showing up, or a life that looks perfectly aligned under the glare of public evaluation. The path your feet have actually trodden with all its unread letters, busy seasons, and silent gaps is the only ground that can safely hold your weight tonight. As you allow these reflections to settle quietly into your chest, the internal pressure to fix your whole life before morning begins to drain out through the open spaces of your awareness. The dry, tight constriction behind your knees is no longer a command to be managed. It is simply a tired muscle that is finally being allowed to submerge in the deep privacy of the night. You can leave the digital marketplace outside the heavy door of your room, recognizing that the distance between you and the world can exist without your active supervision for the next few hours. In a moment, our journey will reach its final, deep shaft, where all the remaining noise of the courtyard dissolves completely into a cool, currentless rest. For now, let your physical body become heavy and full, fully protected by the absolute stillness of the dark, the dry, noisy courtyard of your daytime obligations has completely cleared its clearing, leaving behind a vast, cool perimeter of absolute stillness that expands to fill every corner of your room. The long, intricate arguments of the mind, the persistent anxieties of your unkept promises, and the restless urge to fix the distance have fully spent their electric momentum, dissolving into the heavy, damp dark like loose dust settling over a silent mountain cistern. There is no longer a heavy iron hammer to swing, no rusted hoop driver to manage, and no stiff, moss-coated line that needs to be frantically pulled through the pulley frame. The entire architecture of your old regrets is gently uncoupling itself from your awareness, leaving nothing behind but the slow, unhurried rhythm of a physical form, resting securely in the horizontal dark. Let your body become completely heavy now, sinking down through the supportive layers beneath your calves, as if you were that hand-carved cedar bucket, settling into the deep, quiet currents of the underground spring. The small muscles around your knees, the delicate hinges of your jaw, and the wide spaces between your shoulders are all receiving a total, unconditional permission to go entirely slack. Your breath has become remarkably quiet, a soft, effortless movement of air that requires no guidance, no monitoring, and no conscious intervention from your thoughts. The air simply arrives, fills the empty spaces of your chest, and then glides away into the darkness, carrying the remaining grain of tomorrow's worry along with it. You are completely allowed to stop solving your life for the next few hours. The unread messages, the missed turning points, and the incomplete ledges of reconnection can all rest quietly in their dark shafts without your supervision. The river of your days does not require you to maintain a state of hypervigilance to find its way to the sea. It moves by its own ancient organic intelligence, fully capable of sustaining your weight while you sleep. You have returned to the native sanctuary of your own unrefined presence, a spacious, self-contained home that has never been compromised by the changing metrics of human productivity. Listen to the absolute silence that is growing between the slow movements of your breath. The dry gaps of old self-judgment are swelling shut through the quiet moisture of your heart, leaving the inner channels wide, open, and clear. You do not need to be anything other than what you are right now, a quiet awareness resting in a dark room, completely free from the obligation to perform, to explain, or to justify your choices to the coming dawn. The day is fully resolved, the current is wide and flat, the wood is heavy, and the boundaries between your spirit and the quiet night are softly fading away. Let yourself slide effortlessly into the deep, unbroken stillness of a dreamless sleep, allowing your awareness to dissolve entirely into the dark, comforting expanse of the underground column. What if the true path back to those you love was never found by yanking the rope at the top of the mountain, but by allowing your own heart to sink quietly into the water you are already touching? The water holds you completely now, a dark and silent column that has no memory of the dry seasons above, nor any anxiety for the great oceans that lie ahead. It simply carries your weight, whispering through the dark stone walls that the depth of your presence is already enough, that the simple act of letting go contains all the dignity your heart has ever sought. The submerged cedar wood does not need to justify its position in the current. It does not need to prove to the limestone or the moss that it once belonged to a magnificent forest on the mountain peak. It rests securely in its raw, unpolished nature, completely saturated by the actual water of the well, and in that total immersion it finds a heavy, unshakable peace that no external friction can ever disrupt. Perhaps you can feel your own mind adopting that same deep, saturated quality as you lie here in the stillness. The thoughts that were once so loud, the urgent voices demanding that you fix your past or guarantee your future, are beginning to lose their sharp, distinct outlines. They are softening into the background noise of the night, becoming nothing more than the distant, occasional rustle of dry bamboo leaves in an evening breeze. You do not need to push those thoughts away, and you do not need to follow them into the dark corridors of old arguments. You can simply let them drift across the wide expanse of your awareness, watching them appear and dissolve without ever letting them alter the steady, horizontal posture of your rest. This is the deeper training of the heart, the quiet, daily discipline of allowing yourself to be precisely where your feet are planted. It is the realization that your true nature has never been defined by the external metrics of success or failure, nor has it ever been broken by the sudden detours or silent drifts that life has forced you to take. The imagined blueprint of your relationships was only a map drawn by a mind that could not see the vastness of the whole mountain vein. It was a small, rigid design that tried to contain a current that is naturally meant to turn, widen, and change its shape as it finds its path. By letting that map slip out of your hands, you are not losing your way. You are finally allowing yourself to arrive at the only destination that has ever mattered: the absolute safety of your own quiet heart. Let the rhythmic movement of your breathing expand until it feels as wide as the entire subterranean reservoir at midnight. Each inhalation is a gentle, cool wave of presence entering your body, filling the spaces where tension used to live, and each exhalation is a deep, quiet release, a natural swelling of the wood that allows you to sit lower and more securely in the water. There is no effort in this movement, no striving to achieve a perfect state of meditation, and no pressure to heal your entire history before the sun rises. You are simply existing as a living form in a quiet room, fully supported by the ground beneath you and fully embraced by the immense, non-judgmental mercy of the night. The dry sand of your old expectations has washed clean through the open slats of your mind, leaving the internal channels wide, open, and clear. The machinery of your thoughts has finally gone silent, its heavy wheels resting peacefully in the dark shallows, no longer burdened by the weight of accumulated regret. You are an open channel now, a beautiful, unadorned structure through which the quiet energy of the world can move without any friction or resistance. You do not need to hold on to your grievances to protect your dignity, nor do you need to use shame as a weapon against your own tired spirit. You can let the whole day go, recognizing that you are safe enough to drop your final defenses and slide effortlessly into the deep, dark expanse of rest. As the silence deepens around your bed, feel the heavy, warm comfort of your body becoming completely integrated with the stillness of the room. The boundaries of your worry are dissolving into the cool air, leaving only a weightless, unburdened presence that requires no justification to exist. You are home in the only sanctuary that has ever been real, resting quietly in the deep well, where the fresh water of your life naturally merges with the boundless peace of the night. There is nothing left to steer, nothing left to calculate, and absolutely nothing left to solve. Let yourself drift away into the heavy, horizontal peace of an unbroken sleep, fully trusting the current to hold you exactly as you are. The deep column of water remains unmoving, cradling the vessel in an absolute dark stillness that knows nothing of the frantic deadlines or the busy expectations of the world above. It is a presence that does not keep a tally of the days spent in isolation. Nor does it demand that the dry wood explain its cracks before offering its soothing, continuous dampness. It simply surrounds the timber with an immense, non-judgmental weight, isolating the vessel from the harsh drafts of public evaluation and allowing the grain to expand on its own unhurried, natural timeline. Within this subterranean vault, your awareness is no longer an item up for inspection in a crowded market. It has returned to its own native anonymity, resting quietly in a center that requires no validation from human eyes to remain perfectly solid and secure. Let your mind adopt that same deep, uncalculated stillness as you lie completely relaxed in the coolness of the evening. The faint, lingering echoes of the day's tasks, the subtle thoughts that whisper that you are lagging behind, or that your life is somehow insufficient compared to the visible progress of those around you, are losing their electric momentum. They are becoming soft, fluid, and increasingly distant, like the quiet trickle of water passing through the high stone crevices of a wall that is completely sealed away from the room you are resting in. You do not need to fight against those old habits of comparison, and you do not need to enter the courtroom of your thoughts to defend your path. You can simply allow them to exist as small, passing shadows that cannot reach the quiet core of your chest, watching them slide away into the limestone until nothing remains but the slow, heavy rise and fall of your breath. This is the gentle reclamation of your own inner territory, the willingness to drop the public persona at the edge of the bed and let yourself become completely invisible for the night. It is the realization that your true nature has never been a performance to be edited, a reputation to be secured, or an identity that depends on the shifting approval of a social network. The grand expectations you carried through the waking hours were merely a thin, paper shield built by a mind that was terrified of being left out in the cold, an exhausting armor that mistook continuous availability for genuine security. By letting that armor drop completely into the dark tonight, you are not abandoning your life. You are finally allowing your nervous system to return to the only sanctuary that has ever been real, the unmonitored space of your own breathing body. With every quiet, unhurried breath that enters and leaves your frame, picture the image of the submerged cedar bucket settling deeper into the protective obscurity of the earth. The liquid within the clay is no longer agitated by the glare of an oil lamp or the curious probe of a wooden paddle. It is resting in its own self-contained sanctuary, far below the level where public titles, social standing, or digital metrics have any meaning at all. The dark limestone walls do not require an explanation for your silence. They do not demand a performance before they offer their heavy, stabilizing weight. They simply provide the quiet vault where your true nature can fix its shade on its own natural timeline, completely independent of whether anyone else looks down into the dark tonight. The machinery of your overthinking mind has finally run out of momentum, its heavy wooden covers sealed tight by the gray clay of a soft, non-judgmental awareness, completely empty of the historical silt that made your chest feel tight during the day. You are an empty vessel now, a simple, unadorned structure through which the deep night can move without encountering a single point of rigid resistance, comparison, or internal friction. You do not need to carry your past missteps to prove that you are trying. Nor do you need to use shame as an instrument to correct your direction for tomorrow. You can leave the entire marketplace of human evaluation outside the heavy door of your room, recognizing that the world will continue to spin without your active management, and that you are unconditionally permitted to let your mind go completely soft. As the silence deepens around your bed, the warm weight of your physical form becomes entirely integrated with the horizontal peace of the night. The boundaries of your exposure are melting into the cool air, leaving behind nothing but a weightless, unburdened presence that is already safe, already deep, and already home in its own center. There is nothing left to calculate, nothing left to steer, and absolutely nothing left to solve before the morning arrives. Let yourself drift away into the heavy, rhythmic peace of your body, sliding effortlessly into the deep, dark expanse of a dreamless and unbroken sleep, fully trusting the subterranean vault to cradle you exactly as you are.